Thank y'all for joining me today. My name is Kyle Lasser, and I'm a biologist with Plateau Land and Wildlife Management. I work down in the Hill Country South office, which is located in Bernie, Texas. We also have an office in Dripping Springs and another one in Montgomery County. I'll try to move smoothly through this webinar today. Answer any questions you may have. There is a chat function on the webinar where you can type in a question if you have one. I'll try to answer them. I may not get to them until the end as I'm going through this stuff, but I'll try to get to your questions if we have time. Our topic today is going to be 5 tools of wildlife management, kind of specifically in the Texas Hill Country. So let's begin by talking a little bit about the man who kind of started this whole wildlife management thing. That's Aldo Leopold. You see his picture here on the right. Aldo was a conservationist, a forester, a philosopher, an educator, a writer, and an overall outdoor enthusiast. He worked with the U.S. Forest Service for around 15 years. He was also a professor at the University of Wisconsin. He was really great at examining humanity's relationships with the natural world and inspired a lot of people to see the natural world as kind of a community to which we belong. And he understood the negative and the positive impacts that we as humans can have on wildlife. He wrote a bunch of books, including Game Management, which discusses our topic of today, the 5 tools of wildlife management. Another book, if you're interested, a great book that he wrote is Sound County Almanac. Very, very descriptive, probably the best descriptive writing I've ever read. And it's basically about his time in New Mexico with the U.S. Forest Service. So, most of you joining today probably own property in the Texas Hill Country. So that's going to be our focus of today, and the ways that the 5 tools can be used in this region. However, if you own property somewhere else in Texas, a different ecoregion, things we're going over today will still be helpful, but the application of these practices may vary a little bit. For example, if you got property in South Texas, you're not really going to be focusing on juniper encroaching on areas. That's more going to be geared towards mesquite, weed thatch, things like that. So the practices will be a little bit different, and how you apply them can be different. But we're going to focus on the Texas Hill Country today. So before we kind of get into all the 5 tools, it's kind of important to know some of the history of the landscape of the Texas Hill Country or the area that you're managing. You've probably heard it before, but the Texas Hill Country was primarily composed of grasslands and scattered oaks in the past. Not all of it, but a good portion of it. Obviously, that's a vast difference from what most of us are used to now. Many variables have played into the current shift of the ecosystem to this juniper oak woodlands and parklands that we kind of see now. But the most prominent of those issues are overgrazing by domestic livestock and wild herbivores, that's your deer, and then human suppression of wildfire over the years. So overgrazing. Grasslands of the past were heavily overgrazed sheep. Over time, more people have begun to move away from traditional grazing, but in a lot of cases, that domestic livestock, especially in the Texas Hill Country, those domestic livestock were replaced with exotic livestock. So this is your axis, your fallow, your sika, your black buck, all that good stuff. That coupled with the overpopulation of white-tailed deer in the Texas Hill Country has basically continued that trend that we've been seeing of decades of heavy grazing pressure in the Texas Hill Country. So, as Europeans began to settle the U.S., suppression of wildfires was bound to happen. There was lots of economic benefits to suppressing wildfires. Fires were suppressed to protect their crops, infrastructure, and their livestock. Entire livelihoods back then were basically being protected by suppressing these fires. So it was of vast importance. Before European settlement, wildfires were natural occurrences. They helped keep brush densities down, and they maintained healthy grasslands. So keeping all this kind of past history of the Texas Hill Country in mind, it kind of leads us to where we're going for the 5 tools of wildlife management. So Aldo Leopold, he understood the negative impacts that humans can have on the world, but he also understood that we could have a positive impact on wildlife if we approach things a certain way. He understood that the same tools that we use to basically harm or change the landscape could be used in different ways to manage it and promote healthy wildlife. So this belief that he had led to the 5 tools that he discusses in the book Game Management. These tools that we can use to harm the land and manage it are the axe, the cow, plow, fire, gun. We'll go into each one of these in detail a little bit later. There are many ways to implement these tools. They vary on your management goals, on your habitat type, on your ecoregion, and they're kind of done in a case-to-case basis. Excuse me, I lost my place. So these tools, we're using them to help maintain these healthy natural ecosystems. Like a lot of things, it's used best in moderation. The idea is to use these tools to simulate kind of like a natural occurrences. We're trying to simulate natural occurrences. For example, you've probably heard the benefits of prescribed burns by now, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But performing burns too often without giving the land enough time to recover can often have a negative impact on the land. So let's start off by talking about the first tool, which is axe. So as most of you who own property in the Hill Country know and can attest to, the encroachment of juniper has led to a decrease in available grasslands, plant diversity, and overall wildlife diversity. If you hear me say juniper today, just know that I'm talking about cedar. As most of you probably call it, these terms are kind of interchangeable. I'm talking about the same thing. Obviously, nowadays, the axe has kind of grown obsolete, so when we're talking about the axe, we're referring to the mechanical treatment of brush. There are many methods of clearing brush that you can use. Bulldozing at one time was widely accepted, but in reality, bulldozers are typically more destructive to the land and provide far less benefits. Dozers often expose soils and greatly increase the probability of topsoil being washed away. If you're from the Hill Country, you understand how limited the topsoil is here and how precious it really is. Not to mention all the secondary issues such as erosion that the lack of soil can create. So also with the dozer, it's difficult to be selective in your clearing. A lot of valuable vegetation is removed along with whatever you're targeting. If you're targeting juniper, you're going to take out a lot of the valuable vegetation, the persimmons and all the other stuff that's around it. and that'll decrease the plant diversity on your property, which is a bad thing. So if you're going to use a dozer, brush management should be done in a manner that limits soil disturbance. So to do this, you'd set that dozer about 12 inches or so off the ground, rather than scraping the ground and exposing all that soil. It's recommended that you use less intrusive methods if possible. So hand cutting with the chainsaw or loppers is a great option. It allows you to be way more selective in your management, but it is kind of time consuming, and you're typically limited to smaller size individuals. The chainsaw and the loppers are typically useful when you've got a lot of regrowth or secondary growth individuals kind of encroaching on open areas, or underneath some of these large oaks. You'll get a lot of regrowth and secondary growth. Hydraulic shears, that's another good option. You can clear at least twice as much as hand clearing in a given day, and it still allows you to be selective in your clearing. It's obviously more cost than hand clearing, though. It's heavy equipment, so there's a lot of cost associated with it, and then you got to have somebody who's experienced using that equipment. So mulching or a mulcher, another great option. It can be used, and generally in a selective way, and the only thing with it is it's a lot more expensive. It's probably going to be your most expensive of these selective methods. It can, however, provide multiple benefits if it's used properly. Mulch can be spread in areas of bare ground, which will promote revegetation, give seeds a safe place to germinate so they're not cooking on that bare ground. You do have to be careful, though, when you're spreading it. You don't want to spread it too thick. You try to keep it no thicker than about ½ an inch, ¾ of an inch. Otherwise, you won't have anything, nothing will be able to grow in it. So it can also be placed strategically along slopes. This will help reduce or prevent erosion. An ideal slope would be you got a lot of exposed rock or soil, very little grass cover. You kind of spread that mulch on there. It'll help slow the water, catch some soil in the process, and eventually revegetate that slope. Again, selective clearing is recommended if you've got the option. Instead of just clear cutting an entire area, you can create kind of a mosaic pattern of brush, open patches, brush, open patches. This gives great edge habitat, which is beneficial to all wildlife. It allows things to go out into the open areas, but also gives them a place where they can go back to cover if they're spooked. So, oops, went ahead of myself. So, over the years, you've kind of probably, there's been this negative connotation associated with juniper or cedar. I'm sure you've heard the saying, the only good cedar is a dead cedar. That's not really true. It's like all native species. It serves a purpose. Let's take madrones, for example. So madrones, they naturally have kind of like this weak root system. They often rely on the junipers, kind of intertwine their roots along these slopes and basically use them as an anchor. Texas oaks will often do the same thing. Many oaks or other shrubs, they'll grow inside thick juniper, kind of use it as cover and protection from being eaten from white-tailed deer. It allows them to grow. Mature junipers can also be excellent windbreaks. from heavy gusts or for many different trees. A lot of times, I'm sure you've probably driven down the road and you've seen somebody's property where they basically clear cut all the juniper off the property. All that's left are these little scraggly oaks that are, you know, tiny, thin as a toothpick. The next time a big windstorm comes through, you drive by there again, you'll probably see a good portion of them snapped off or dead. Not to mention, say they get oak wilt on that property, God forbid, and now you got no trees. So there's no canopy cover for anything. I could give you tons of examples, but I'm kind of already ranting a little bit. So just understand they're a natural part of the ecosystem, especially these mature ones. They've been there for a long time. The problems occur when they kind of begin to overtake or dominate areas, kind of reducing that plant diversity. All right, on to the cow. So bison were common in Texas in the past. They were a primary grazer. Their migration routes helped keep grasslands healthy and diverse. Their hosts tilled the soils, their manure fertilized, and they provided grazing pressure, which can increase vegetative diversity. This increased diversity of vegetation greatly benefits doves, turkey, quail, and many other seed-eating animals. So it's a good thing. Many of you may ask yourself, well, what's the difference between bison grazing on the land and cows grazing on the land? Cows can do all the same things bison can do, pretty much, right? Well, you're pretty much right in that. The main difference is that bison were nomadic and they roamed throughout the countryside. Domestic livestock aren't. So there's also this added factor of fencing, restricting the livestock movement even further. So it basically results in a constant overgrazing cycle year after year, and the grasses don't have adequate time to recover. This is when you'll typically start to see kind of like an area that's dominated by an invasive species like KR bluestem or something that's not very palatable, like broomweed. The entire area is covered in it, and all those type of plants typically they don't have very much benefit to wildlife, so that's why they're not getting eaten. As we mentioned, cattle, they can do similar things to bison, and when used properly, they can be very beneficial to wildlife. Stocking rates are really important, along with rotational grazing methods. There's stocking rates for a reason, everybody, so try to follow them as closely as possible. Don't overstock your property, don't exceed your carrying capacity on your property. Grazing in itself, it's natural. It helps reduce the quantity of grass. That allows sunlight to reach the ground. That'll promote forage production, which increases vegetative diversity, which again is beneficial to wildlife. You kind of heard me talk about the importance of vegetative diversity a little bit. I've mentioned it a couple times. It's been a recurring theme. It's probably going to stay a recurring theme. As part of the goals of these management activities is to increase plant diversity. The wider variety of native and desirable plants that you have on your property, the more wildlife will benefit. So, rotational grazing, it's a great way to manage the herd if you got livestock. What you do is you'd allow that herd to kind of graze a pasture or an area until sufficient grazing has taken place. Typically, you try not to allow grazing of the grass lower than 3 inches, about 3 inches. Any further than that, you can damage that meristematic tissue of the grass, which can kill the grass. Once the grass has been grazed to an appropriate level, the cattle or the livestock, whatever you got out there, should be rotated to another area or pasture. That'll allow the grass time to recover. If the grass is constantly grazed and it's not allowed time to rest, those blades will shorten, which shortens the roots, and it'll eventually kill the grass. So an easy way to remember that: kill a shoot, you'll kill the root. All right, so on to the plow. This, for obvious reasons, can be hard to do in the hill country, and it doesn't apply to a large percentage of landowners in this area, so we probably won't spend very much time on it. But it could apply to some of you in the region, or if you're in another ecoregion with deep soils, this could be a potential activity for you. The hill country, we talked about the limited topsoil, so it's not really recommended for most properties in the area, but it can be achieved if the soil substrate is strong on your property in a certain area. This plowing is it's trying to mimic the bison's hoof action on the soil, where large herds used to, hang out and turn up the soil. A good time to use this method would be if you have a pasture that's absolutely kind of dominated with an invasive like KR bluestem, or you got Johnson grass, or say you got an old hay field that you don't really use. There's some good deep soils there, but it's the idea of something being dominated by a non-native species. You could lightly disc up that area, so you're lightly disking this pasture. It breaks up the dominance, and it encourages forward growth. It gives you a potential of getting some other native grasses to come in. Again, that increases your plant diversity, and that's great for your property. All right, so for all you kind of pyromaniacs out there, here's your favorite subject, fire. As we discussed earlier, European settlement. With the European settlement came the suppression of wildfires. Fires, they occur naturally about every 5 or 7 years, or they were kind of set by Native Americans. As suppression continued, later successional plants kind of began to take over our grasslands, increased brush encroachment, which eventually led to parklands and woodlands that we kind of see today in the hill country throughout the majority of it. When fire is used properly, though, in conjunction with some of these other things we're talking about, proper grazing techniques and prescribed control of deer, it can benefit your property greatly, and you can kind of mold this perfect or preferred habitat for wildlife. We mentioned juniper a little bit earlier, different ways to control it. Fire can be another option of control. Juniper is not fire tolerant, so this secondary and regrowth stuff can be controlled pretty easily in an area if you got a proper prescribed burn conducted. The burn, it kind of replenishes nutrients into the soil. It'll also remove that duff, which is that dead matter that's kind of at the bottom of the ground, which can build up. And when it builds up, it kind of makes it hard for things like small mammals, quail, or other little small critters. Like if you're in South Texas, if you got horned lizards, that duff can kind of slow down their movement, make it a little bit difficult for them. So when you do these burns, it burns all that up. When the grasses come back, you don't have as much dust. Things can move around in the grass a little bit easier. All right. So the last on our list is gun. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably have noticed we have a huge overpopulation of white-tailed deer in the hill country. Everybody has probably either hit one while driving or, come extremely close to hitting one. Heck, the other day I was walking around Bernie, came across a bunch of does that were just kind of standing in the middle of some in the middle of a lawn munching on some grass in a crowded neighborhood. I didn't have a care in the world. So that obviously doesn't happen unless we got way too many deer. So we're talking about how many deer we have. It may be hard for you to believe, but back in the 1900s, early 1900s, we almost extirpated them from the U.S. So currently we got populations increasing at a high rate each year. With this increased density of deer, we get increased browsing pressure. That results in overbrowsing. That degrades the rangeland. Since there's less food available per deer, deer body weights decrease. If you paid attention, you ever notice how small white-tailed deer are in the hill country compared to elsewhere? That's because the nutritional intake for deer in the hill country is less than most elsewhere in Texas. So we got small deer. With this less available food, fawn crops decrease. All the deer being packed in so close to each other increases the chance of disease transfer from deer to deer, as well as from deer to human. If you got property in Sutton County or Northwest Edwards, you may be experiencing some of these problems right now with the recent anthrax outbreak. So harvesting is one of the more important tools of wildlife management. Without it, all these other tools can kind of become a moot point if you have an overpopulation of white-tailed deer still. We've basically kind of removed all of their natural predators, so the populations have no way of being kept in check besides us. Over the past 20 years, we've kind of seen this drastic decline in hunters. There's a lot of reasons. They vary, they're complex, so I won't go into too much detail on them, but it's important for you to know. It's something that needs to be acknowledged. Even if you're kind of not into hunting, it's important to understand that harvesting can be an important management tool when used properly on your property. Overpopulation of white-tailed deer can have a wide variety of negative impacts on vegetation on your property. As the vegetation decreases, soils become exposed. The soils get washed away, and that leaves it with just exposed rocks, which then results in no ground cover to help capture that the rainwater when it rains, which increases erosion again, and it makes the land more prone to flooding during flood events. So without vegetation to slow down the water, it'll just run down slope too quickly, forming or increasing gullies along the way. When you got annual harvesting and you're keeping the population at a sustainable number, you'll see a lot of benefits to all wildlife, not just your deer population, but all wildlife in general. It'll make your property healthier and more diverse. All right, so this is a property in Bandera County that we conducted a wildlife management plan for. The property was high fenced, had exotics by the previous owner, mainly axis and black buck. So heavy grass grazers. They also had an overpopulation of white-tailed deer in addition to these exotics. So site visit was conducted in 2013. That's your top picture right here. As you can see, the property was highly overgrazed and overpopulated. It's a little bit, well, it's easy to see in the top photo, but there's lots of exposed soil here, and little to no forbs are present, as well as grasses at a minimum. So after consulting with the landowner, they decided to kind of remove all these exotics. They were going to keep the white-tailed deer, obviously, but they wanted to bring these white-tailed deer numbers down to an acceptable level. So they asked what's an acceptable level of white-tailed deer. In the Texas Hill Country, this would probably be 1 deer per 10 to 15 acres, something like that. So property was visited again in 2017, which is this bottom photo down here. You can see land is kind of recovered pretty nicely. Again, you can kind of see this contrast between the two. Same property. It's amazing the restoration that can kind of happen when the land is kind of given this chance to recover from overgrazing. I know it's hard to see, but in this bottom photo, you can see a bunch of good native grasses like little blue stem, some Indian grass. There's some switchgrass in there, among others. Big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass. These are all kind of good indicators usually of a healthy grassland. They're basically kind of like candy to a lot of these herbivores, so they're kind of the first to go. So when they're coming back, that's usually a good sign. They're also some of the most beneficial grasses to a lot of your other native wildlife that you got out on your property. You can also see some good forbs coming back. It's kind of hard to see again in these photos, but there's some good forbs coming back, and even some native shrubs. All these things we're talking about are great for, they benefit dove, they benefit quail, they benefit turkey, and many other grassland birds that are kind of declining. So if you don't got turkey, you don't got quail on your property, managing these grasslands and things like that can promote them. This landowner in particular never really saw turkey on his property when he first got it, but as he started kind of reducing these populations, the grasslands started to recover. He started to see turkey more frequently, and now he's got sustained populations of turkey on his property. So, all right, I ran through this kind of quick, but so Plateau is part of a family of companies. We can help you with most of your rural landowner needs, anything from estate planning to real estate to 1031 exchanges. We can probably help you out some way, fashion. Thank you for sticking around through all that, through all this stuff, and I hope it was at least somewhat informative. Again, my name is Kyle Laster. You can find all my contact information right here. Feel free to reach out if you got any other questions. If I can't answer your questions, I'll point you in the direction of somebody who can, somebody a little bit who's more specific to whatever you're asking. But I can try to answer some questions right now if you got any. So